Hello. Good Sunday morning to you. Lovely to see you all here at Presbyterian Church of the Covenant in Greensboro, North Carolina. Welcome to the folks online as well. Welcome back even. We were temporarily down because of technical problems last week. We're glad to have you back. And it's good to see everybody here. A quick reminder, after our service today, we will be having a call congregational meeting for the purpose of electing our two new elders for this session. So after the service, I encourage you to stay for that brief meeting. Folks online, again, thank you for being here. If you would, please go to athinkingchurch.org and learn more about us there. But also, I'm determined this will be the year that we actually at least break even on our online broadcast. We came close last year, and I'm counting on you folks of helping us. Even the littlest amount will allow us to continue to do these broadcasts. Thank you all for being here. Reminder that we do have our offering basket on the back, so please find that before you do exit today. You may notice a considerable lack of Stephanie today. Stephanie tested positive yesterday or Friday night for COVID, so she wasn't able to be here. But Joel, being the gracious person that he is, was able to fill in. So we're fortunate to have Joel Landau with us here. And I know now that I've mentioned that you really want me to get the readings done so we can hear some Joel. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. Our first reading comes from 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 through 11. And I'm reading from the updated edition of the New Revised Standard Version. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days, and visions were not widespread. And at that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he couldn't see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, Samuel, Samuel. And he said, Here I am. And he ran to Eli and he said, Here I am, you called for me. But he said, I didn't call for you, go lay down. So he went and he lay down. The Lord called Samuel again, Samuel, Samuel. Samuel got up and he went to Eli and he said, Here I am, you called for me. But he said, I did not call you, my son, lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again, a third time. And he got up and he went to where Eli was and said, Here I am, you called for me. Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, Go lay down. And if he calls you, you shall say, Speak, Lord. Your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. May we add blessing and understanding to the reading of these words. I also have a reading from an author. Her name is Lucy Pierce, who has had a couple of best-selling Amazon books. I think they're fictional books. This one is from her book, Burning Woman. She speaks of the divine or a higher power. It says, Who is she? Capital S. Who is she? She is your power, your feminine source, Big Mama, the goddess, the great mystery, the web weaver, the life force. The first time, the 20th time, you may not recognize her or pretend not to hear her as she fills your bodies with ripples of terror and delight. But when she calls you, you will know you have been called. Then it is up to you to decide if you will answer. Okay, we've gotten to that point where we get to hear Joel.
Well, thank you, Mark. Do you do promo work? This song was written by a wonderful singer-songwriter in the Chapel Hill area named Cynthia Crossan. This is called Your Spirit Moves in Me. Just like the tree whose roots grow deep, just like the river flowing on, just like the sweet winds blowing on, your spirit moves in me. Just like the stars that circle around, just like the whippoorwill spring song, just like the sun is shining on, your spirit moves in me. Enfolding, surrounding, flowing from you into me. Enfolding, surrounding, flowing from me into you. Spirit of earth is holding me. Spirit of water, air, and fire. Spirit alive in the rocks and trees and beasts and seas and skies. In every one of us you are. In everything we see and feel, sprouting from us like spring's first seed, flowering in the field, expanding, renewing, flowing from me into you, expanding, renewing, flowing from you into me. Just like the tree whose roots grow deep, just like the river flowing on, just like the sweet wind blowing on, your spirit moves in me.
Thank you for that, Joel, very much. Appreciate that. My message this morning is entitled Called. So over the last few months, interestingly enough, I've been asked about what brought me to ministry. One person even specifically asked about my call story. I suspect that they thought it would be a fairly intellectual choice that I made, but boy, were they surprised. It made me realize that it has been about 5 years since I've shared that story. So I thought I would do that again today. So for me, the concept of what being called means, not surprising, has changed over the years. Like I said, it's not really a surprise. The idea is very closely related to theology, and as most of you know, I happen to believe that if your theology isn't changing from time to time, you simply aren't taking it seriously enough. Today's reading is an example of one understanding of being called. It's probably, honestly, the most dominant understanding in Christianity, in most of Christianity anyway. In terms of traditional thinking, if you hear someone say that they were called into ministry, they're probably talking about something very much like the story today. And as I just alluded to, it's even true of my call story, at least in terms of what my theology was back then, and we'll get to that. That understanding of being called into ministry, is a funny thing. You see, from Moses to Jeremiah, the Bible gives us example after example of great leaders and prophets who really just didn't want to do it. I've talked to lots of other ministers, and frequently is some version of this "not I, Lord" mentality in their call stories. Take me, for instance, and I am by no means unique in this story. If I'm brutally honest with myself, there was something in me that was being called into ministry when I was in middle school. I could actually take you back to First Presbyterian Church in Asheboro, North Carolina, and sit you down almost exactly on the spot where I was when I knew this. From time to time as I grew up, that call would sort of tug at me, and I would dismiss it, or I would basically make the argument that God was wrong. So, some 25 years after that feeling that I felt, the call thing was still present in my life, but it had started becoming more insistent. It was like a record that was constantly skipping in my head, and no matter what I did, it wouldn't go away. And I promise you, I tried to make it go away. I would dismiss it. I would deny it. I'd even taken to giving signs that had to happen for me to believe that it was really a call. And then the signs would happen, and then I'd add another sign that had to happen. I was about to add yet another sign to try to shut off this constant game in my head that God and I were playing. At least that's how I thought about it back then. I was about to add another sign that needed to happen when the Christian radio station I was listening to, yes, I listened to Christian radio, don't judge. When the Christian radio station that I was listening to aired a commercial that I would shortly afterward describe as God hitting me across the back of the head with a 2x4. It was so striking. I remember everything about it to this day. I was driving my white Chevy S10 pickup heading north on Holden. It was just about at the intersection of Florida Street. And an advertisement came on encouraging people to give more to their church. So the guy says on the radio says something like this: "I'll give more to the church if this dime lands on head." You hear him flip it, it lands on head. Then he says, "If it lands on tails." You hear him flip it, lands on tails. Finally, he says, "If it lands on its side." Presumably, setting a benchmark that can't be achieved and justifying the decision that he already wanted to make to not give any more money. You hear him flip the coin. You hear it hit the floor. You hear it roll around, but you don't hear it fall. And then he says, "Never seen that before." It had landed on its side. In that moment, something happened to me that had never happened to me before that time, or even has happened since. The way I experienced it back then, filtered through my theology at that time, was like being surrounded by this joy. It was inside of me, it was outside of me, and I launched into uncontrollable, joyous laughter. In my mind, I had finally gotten it. I basically thought, I have been running from this calling for many years. And if it takes me many years to get back to it, so be it, but I'm going to try. Like I said, our theology seems to play a large role. Now we understand this thing that some call a calling. So a month or so later, I'm standing in a 3-room home that I'm helping build for a family who had never had a roof over their heads in Piedras Negras, Mexico. It was in a section of town that's nothing more than a covered over trash heap called the Tierra y Esperanza, or the Land of Hope. I'm in this not quite finished room with the Reverend Dr. Bob Henderson. And he says, "How's work?" Now, at the time, I was the director of IT and the director of personnel for a mid-sized retail company. "Work is work," I said. He said, that never really seemed like what you should be doing. And from there, the talk went into ministry and divinity school, how that could happen and what the church might do to help in the recognition of my call. A few months later, I'm standing alone in my driveway, tears in my eyes when the unthinkable had happened. Wake Forest University School of Divinity had accepted me as a student. I had tried to deny it. I had tried to run from it. I had tried to then define the timeline for which it needed to happen on, but the theology I had at the time told me that God obviously had different plans. So in today's reading, Samuel hears the call of God, but dismisses it as Eli's voice. For that matter, Eli, who's practically blind, a man who relies more on a sense of hearing than most people, he hears nothing. And, many ministers and theologians alike have seen both of those things as a sort of indication of a sort of universal reality that I mentioned earlier of how people try to deny God's calling in their lives, or at least be dismissive of it. And maybe that is what's going on there. Honestly, I don't know. Contextually, it's really hard to say very clearly what it was or wasn't. But honestly, though, I don't think it really matters what it was, a subconscious denial of God's call, a storytelling technique to communicate something about those that God calls, or simply groggy lack of focus as a result of being woken up. What's more interesting and frankly more informative about being called is what happens after Samuel first thinks it's the voice of Eli 3 times and then finally recognizes that it's God. But first, let's briefly pop back into my call story. As I am preparing for my first year of graduate school, after having been out of school for more than a decade, Reverend Henderson calls me into his office. And he does. He confirms his and the session's recognition of my call. And then he says, what at the time I thought was a very wrong and discouraging thing to say, but what I now see is exactly the right thing to tell me at that point in time. He said, Mark, if you can do anything else and be happy, do it. Way to suck the joy out of a moment there, Bob. Now, back to Samuel. Whether you take the story as true or made up, it had to be amazing that final time that he was called. As the text says, this time it was not a disembodied voice. The text says, now Yahweh came and stood there.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
You're fine. A disembodied voice. Woo. Got a little too real there. It's like God was like, I don't think you're doing so well. I didn't get it. The text says, now Yahweh came and stood there calling as before, Samuel, Samuel. This time, Samuel sees God. That's a real call there. What a wonderful, undeniable, joyful moment that must have been. I can almost see Samuel in my mind's eye filled with uncomfortable and joyous laughter. Of course, I might just be projecting there. Still, an altogether spiritual and uplifting moment in the story. Now, what we didn't continue on to read in today's scripture was what Yahweh says right after that. Right after he says, here's your servant, I am listening. Yahweh says, Samuel, there's some things that I need to tell you that people aren't going to like. It will make their ears burn. And we are starting with the minister that you serve, Eli. I need you to tell him that I am going to come down hard on him and his family because they use my name to support things that I don't condone. It is your job to tell them for me that they will be punished forever. Way to suck the joy right out of the moment, Yahweh. The truth is, what Reverend Henderson told me and what Yahweh told Samuel in the stories are just realities of being called into ministry. Next Monday, our nation pauses to recognize the life of the only minister to ever have a federal holiday named in his behalf. He knew of the perils of being in ministry, of accepting the call, of standing up against people who use God's name to condone things that he does not support. It is a wild and lonely path to follow at times. It will cause people's ears to burn, and you will face difficult times. Only accept the call if there is nothing else you can do that will make you happy. Dr. King knew of the perils of trying to speak truths to a world at times like Samuel, who may not want to hear or may not be able to hear it. In January of 1956, Dr. King, like Samuel in our scripture story today, was finding it difficult to sleep. The Montgomery bus boycott had heated up, and he had received a call late that night, but unlike Samuel, it wasn't God. It was a call threatening to harm him and his family. Samuel's answer to God was, "Speak, your servant is listening." Dr. King not only taught this perspective, this reality relating to God, but he lived it, listening to God. Late that night, as he had reached the breaking point of exhaustion, he tells the story. He said he sat at his kitchen table, went to God in prayer, and listened, saying, "Speak, your servant is listening." We know the story of Dr. King. That moment was the beginning of his calling to a national ministry, and it would push Dr. King to confront many of the injustices in our nation. It would be a somewhat lonely road at times. There would be many sleepless nights listening to the voice of God. It would be easy to see the difficult road ahead, to listen to the many detractors and to run away. But he did not. And the same was true for Samuel. After being told that he has to confront his teacher, the master under which he served, and receive spiritual guidance, and he was to tell Eli that God would punish his house forever, it would have been easy to see the difficult road ahead and to run away. But he did not. What do we take from this? Well, while there may be a few of you who have struggled with a sense of call, or maybe currently are, I would guess that few here consider yourselves called into ministry like Samuel or even like Dr. King. So what is the message in this for all of us? Let's answer that with a different Martin Luther. The Martin Luther after whom Dr. Martin Luther King was named. A man frequently referred to as the father of Reformation, which led to Protestantism, to many denominations, including our denomination, Presbyterianism. It's something that he wrote that was entitled, "To the Christian Nobility of the German Nation." He said this: that the Pope or bishop anoints, ordains, consecrates, or dresses differently from the laity may make a hypocrite or an idolatrous oil-painted icon, but it in no way makes a Christian or a spiritual human being. In fact, he says, we are all consecrated priests through baptism, as in St. Peter in 1 Peter 2 says, you are a royal priesthood, a priestly kingdom. Most people trace the roots of something called the priesthood of all believers back to that point. You, according to Peter and according to Martin Luther, are part of a royal priesthood. As followers of the teachings of Jesus, as people striving to grow spiritually, it behooves us to live them out in this world. And frankly, just as decent human beings, we should also feel called to live out lives that make the world a better place. How do we do that? How do we live them out that way? As a collective priesthood, as moral human beings, how do we live out this, we'll say, calling? Seek justice. Practice kindness. Walk humbly. Seek justice. Practice kindness. Walk humbly. That is your calling. That is the discipline of the priesthood of believers and of morally upright people. That is the call ringing out to you in the dark nights of oppression, discrimination, and marginalization, which is still all too present in our nation. You must only decide if you will answer. Joe?
It's always a little challenge getting in and out here without tripping over anything. This is a song, I think it's from the play Godspell. Day by day, oh dear Lord, three things I pray: to see thee more clearly, to follow thee more nearly, to love thee more dearly. Day by day, day by day, day by day, oh dear Lord, three things I pray: to see thee more clearly, to follow thee more nearly, to love thee more dearly. Day by day, day by day, day by day, oh dear Lord, three things I pray: to see thee more clearly, to follow thee more nearly, to love thee more dearly. Day by day. Thank you. And one more short song here. This one's by George Harrison. Give me love, give me love, give me peace on earth. Give me life, give me life, give me free from birth. Give me a hope to help me cope with this heavy load, trying to touch and reach you with heart and soul. My Lord, please take hold of my hand, that I might understand you. Won't you please, oh won't you give me love, give me love, give me peace on earth. Give me life, give me free from birth. Now give me hope to help me cope with this heavy load, trying to touch and reach you with heart and soul. Lord.
Thank you so much for that, Joel. It is truly always a treat to have you with us. Thank you for being here so much. Most of you are probably familiar with the peace prayer or the prayer of St. Francis. It's the one that starts off, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Well, today I would like to share with you what has become known as the reverse prayer of St. Francis. Unlike the prayers / meditations that I write and share with you, this clearly is written just as a prayer, but please accept it in whatever way is right for you. Let us bow our heads. Dear Lord, make me a channel of disturbance. Where there is apathy, let me provoke. Where there is compliance, let me bring questioning. Where there is silence, may I be a voice. Where there is too much comfort and too little action, grant disruption. Where there are doors closed and hearts locked, grant me the willingness to listen. When laws dictate and pain is overlooked, when tradition speaks louder than need, grant that I may seek rather to do justice than to talk about it. Disturb us, O Lord, to be with as well as for the alienated, to love the unlovable as well as the lovely. Lord, make me a channel of your disturbance. Amen. Receive this blessing. May you walk in harmony with each other and with creation, knowing that we are one. And may you know love and happiness throughout your life. And may your words and actions bring that love and happiness to all you meet.